Hey everyone, good morning. Welcome to Eastern Hills. We're so glad that you're here this morning, whether you're joining us online or in the room. Welcome. Just as we get started this morning, wanted to point out, I'm sure most of you realize that it is Memorial Day weekend. And Memorial Day weekend's kind of the unofficial start of summer, a chance to get together with family and friends, barbecue, spend some time together. But for a lot of people, Memorial Day is a really tough day, as they remember family members who served in our military that had died serving our country. So as a community, as a church, our country, we want to honor and remember those people this weekend. So if you have a chance, even in the quiet of your own heart, sometime this weekend, just stop and maybe reflect on what that sacrifice has been for some of those families. Say a prayer for them and just be thankful for the service members that have given their lives for our freedom. Hey, my name's Kendall. This is Kelsey. Kelsey, we're going to get started with a question here. Have a little fun here this morning before our service.
Yes, our question of the day, we'd love for you to answer in whatever chat you're watching on. If you're in the room or maybe you're not sure what chat, you can find it on our app. The question is, who was your first celebrity crush? So I got to go to you first.
Oh yeah, this is a I think pretty easy one for me. It's got to be Alyssa Milano. She played Samantha Maselli on Who's the Boss. And not only that, I remember back in the day in the store, you have those flipping posters, where you could flip through. Her poster was in there. She was wearing a New Jersey Devils hockey jersey. And from that day on, I was like a New Jersey Devils fan. And really wanted to buy the poster for my wall, but they were like $7.99. I could just never scrape together that kind of cash as a 12-year-old. So
I think posters might be the only thing that costs less now than they did back then.
Maybe.
That is steep.
Maybe.
I wouldn't pay $7.99 for a poster.
What about you?
For me, that one's easy, and I did have his poster many, many, many times. That'd be Orlando Bloom from Lord of the Rings / Pirates, but mostly Lord of the Rings, when he looked at you like this. The entire series.
I think for me, he probably wasn't even born when I was having my first celebrity crush. So, yeah, that shows our age difference for sure.
Sorry. This went downhill fast.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of answers already. Olivia Newton-John is on here. Tom Cruise in Top Gun. The next one's coming out. Jennifer Love Hewitt from Pete.
There are some good ones on the chat too. Gloria says Donny Osmond. That's an older one. Jody from Family Affair, says Susan.
Ooh, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah, that's a good one. Colin says Scarlett Johansson all day.
Side note, that's someone joking with us because Colin Jost is married to Scarlett Johansson.
Right. Same with the next one. Ross says Rachel from Friends. Yeah,
Guys,
that's awesome.
Oh, Kendall Hummus.
Oh, who said that?
You're the first celebrity crush.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
JJ.
Hey, if you're looking for a place to join this chat and make us as uncomfortable as Kendall is right now, or if you need any of the information that we're going to talk about, especially today, there's so many resources that we're going to hand out to you. You can go to ehills.org/weekend. Trust me, this weekend, you're going to want to check that out.
Hey, we are in the middle of a series called Get Out of the Weeds. Last week in week 2, we talked about gossip and slander. And I don't know about you, but for me, it was a challenging thing. It was a challenging message to hear. And then even this week, thinking about, am I having the right conversation with the right person, or am I having a conversation about someone else? If you didn't get a chance to check it out, go to our website. Make sure you watch last week. And then this week, we're going to be talking about lust. And so a little bit of a disclaimer. This week, we're talking about sexual lust, something that you can grow out of control in your life. And we want to be very careful about how we talk about that and how we cover this topic. But we want parents and guardians, we want you to be the heroes of your children's story. That's what we always say. And we want you to be prepared for that. So whether you watch this first and maybe have them watch it later, maybe that you bring them with you, or you just take some of the information back to your kids, it's entirely up to you. Just wanted you to know that. We also have a resource for you on how you can have this conversation with your kids at ehills.org/weekend. You can check that out there. And then the last thing is that we are celebrating communion this weekend. So if you didn't grab communion elements on your way in, you can grab those real quick. And if you're at home, maybe find some bread and some juice to join us in communion later.
That's good. We have a little battle of the Bonds going on right now. So Gigi says Sean Connery, and Sophie says Daniel Craig.
Oh.
I'm
But
just-
James Bond overall.
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? Daniel Craig.
Marv says Kathy Ireland. That's good.
And Meryl Streep.
Okay.
I'll go with it. I still think Kendall's our best answer so far, so I'm sticking with that one. Hey, we also want to take a moment just to thank you for your generosity. Like we do every week, we are so grateful. In fact, this past Sunday, we got to celebrate together some of our graduating seniors and encourage them and give them blue bottles filled with notes saying that God's got them and God's going to carry them through this next season. We got to invite some families to join us for that. And so we just want to say thank you. We got to celebrate because of your generosity. We got to enjoy some amazing desserts and some great conversation because of what you allow us to do. So thank you for sharing with students that Jesus makes life better. It's awesome.
Hey, want to let you know too, if you're new here, this is your first week online or in the room, we would love for you to text the word new to the number that you see on your screen. We'd love to connect with you, help you find a way to get connected here at Eastern Hills. And if you are in the room and it's your first time here, stop by the guest house after the service. We have a gift for you. We'd love to meet you and get to know you a little bit better.
Channing Tatum. I'm just
Oh.
going to drop an answer.
There you go.
So there you go, Susie. We do have a question that we would love for you to start pondering now as we're getting ready for the message. This will just kind of help you get in the right mindset. The question is, where do things get lost in your house?
Everywhere. At my house, there are too many people, too many things. Stuff gets lost everywhere. But if you ask mom where your stuff is and you say you've already looked for it and she finds it, you're in big trouble. So search long and hard before you ask mom.
All moms have
Yeah.
a unique ability to just
Yes.
find things. So
Yes.
moms, thank you for helping us find all of our belongings.
What about you, Kelsey?
Thank you. For me, it's my refrigerator. Like, I know I bought garlic. I know I have a container somewhere in the fridge. Don't know where it is, so I'm just gonna buy more. And then that happens over and over and over again. And now I have 300 containers of garlic in my fridge.
You'd think you would be able to find 300
Nope.
in your fridge.
It's a lot of garlic bread.
Perfect. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for our pre-service show. Hope this has been a little bit of fun for you. We're gonna reset our stage and we'll be back to sing in just a minute.
sing together. Well, friends, as we continue in the service, you can go ahead and grab a seat.
What a great reminder that even though we don't deserve it, and we can't earn it, we have the infinite love of our Father in heaven, a provider, Jireh, who provides for all of our needs. Such a great reminder here this morning. Hey, I have two very important things that I want to tell you about. The first is this, that it is Memorial Day weekend. And Memorial Day is a tough day for a lot of people. It's a day that we stop as a country, as a community, and as a church, and we want to remember and we want to honor members of our military that have died serving our country. And so like I mentioned in the pre-service show, I'm hoping and praying that at some time this weekend, you have an opportunity just to get in the quietness of your own heart. Say a prayer for those families, a prayer of thanks, a prayer of comfort for the sacrifice that one of their family members made for you and I to have freedom in this country. The second thing I want to tell you about is Cultivate. Our next session of Cultivate is going to start on June 7th. And Cultivate is a 4-week short-term group that you can get involved in to find out what your next step in your spiritual journey is. And so whether you've been following Jesus for 5 minutes, 5 years, a lifetime, every one of us can take a next step with Jesus. And Cultivate is there to help you figure that out. In February, a number of us went through Cultivate, had such a great experience. We want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to be a part of Cultivate. So we're offering it again right now here in June. You can register by going to ehills.org/weekend. Register right there, get involved. Don't miss it this time. It's going to be another great opportunity for you to take a next step with Jesus. Hey, we're so glad that you're here with us this weekend, and welcome to week 3 of Get Out of the Weeds.
Well, hey everybody, welcome. So glad you're here, whether you're joining us here in the room or you're somewhere online maybe, like on a lake or in Cancun or something, wherever you are, thanks for being here, really appreciate it. If this is your first time with us, either online or here in the room, you've gotten here for kind of a family meeting day. And so I wanna just give you a heads up about that. We're gonna talk about something and do something that we don't do every time we gather. And so if you absolutely can't stand it, good news, we don't do it every week. If you really like it and it's like, oh, this is the kind of place I was looking for, hey, from time to time, we do it. So either way, we're glad you're here. Just want you to know kind of where we're headed a little bit. I mentioned this last weekend. I talked a little bit about over the course of the last year, we have watched from the expansive reach of the online world to in-person gatherings, we have watched more people get connected with the hope and message of Jesus here at Eastern Hills than ever before in our history as a church, and that's been incredible. And it's because there's a group of people that financially support that. And a number of you have started to give that have found Eastern Hills and started to get connected over the course of the last year. And last week I told you what I wanted to do is just help you walk through setting up a recurring gift to give some attention to your intention. We're not trying to convince you to do anything, but if you feel like, you know what, I do want to make sure that whether or not we're around for a week this summer or not, that what I believe God's calling me to do or calling us to do as a family gets done financially. And so here's what I'm going to ask. If you are a regular part of Eastern Hills and you give financially, would you do me a favor and just take your phone out right now to reduce some social pressure for some folks that I'm also about to take their phone out, or asked to take their phone out right now? That'd be great. You can pretend that it was in your pocket, even though it was like right next to you. You'd be like, oh, here it is. It's so convenient. It was already unlocked. This is great. That's fine. And then the other group that I'd love to take out their phone is if that's you. If you go, I really do want to set up recurring giving on whatever level. I'm not going to tell you the number. I'm not going to do that weird thing that pastors do sometimes where they're like, I feel like God is telling me you need. No, I'm not doing that. Whatever you feel like God's calling you to give. And here's what the first step is. Go into the text message app of your phone and type in the word eHills in the message line to the number 77977. Text the word eHills to the number 77977. And as you type in that word and text that number, you'll get a response just like this one. And you can tap the link on that little message back and it will take you to a page that looks like this one. And this page will allow you to basically give all the basic information for how you want to handle recurring gift. So the amount, the frequency, when you want it to start. Again, there's no minimums. This is all between you and God. But once you've done all of that, and you can even do it like when I'm talking, like when I'm done with all this, you're still working on it. Sounds awesome. Here's the good news. People are on their phones every week. This week, I'm gonna look out, I'm gonna see your phone and be like, I bet that person's setting up recurring giving. So win-win, really, it's fine. But our heart, right, is that we make giving a priority. If we're followers of Jesus and we call Eastern Hills home, you can fill that out. And then once you get past there, you'll see a screen like this. It's pretty common with financial information to verify that it's you. You type in your number, it'll send you a code back. If you have an iPhone, there's like a little message that you can tap that'll just auto-populate that code. And then when you hit next again, it will take you to a page where you can put in either your card information or your bank account information. And you'll confirm and that's it. And so would love if that's something that God's calling you to do this weekend, to make that as easy as possible for you to do. If that was like, Phil, why did you go that slow through all that? Fantastic, you can do it, that's great. If you're like, Phil, how could you possibly go that fast and think that I could follow you? Our accounting and finance guy, his name's Anthony, he's in the guest house all weekend this weekend. So if you want help afterwards, you can go talk to him. He would love to help you. All right, I'm gonna pray for us and we're gonna get started here in just a second. If you've never been here before, never heard me speak, I pray kneeling. This morning we're gonna talk about a topic and a subject that rarely gets talked about in our world from a biblical perspective. And I think it's important for us to just ask that God would speak directly to each and every one of us. Would you pray with me? God, thank you. Thank you that you don't leave us on our own with conversations like this, that as easy as it would be to kind of push back or just define our own reality here, you have a better way, like you have so many better things in this life of following you. Would you help us to see it, to savor it, to desire it, and to turn from what seems right to us to what we know is right in you. In Jesus' name, amen. So in the pre-service show, I asked you the question, where do things get lost in your house? And some of you guys answered. You said like kind of a bunch of different places, right? In our house, the place that's probably easiest for something to get lost is the couch. The couch cushions, it feels like there's a vacuum in between them. We have 4 kids and we just had too much free time, so we got a dog. And so just a lot of things can get stuck in there. And even trying to keep it sort of clean, after a while you go in and you're looking for something, and the longer that the something you're looking for has been in there, the more it starts to look like everything else that's in there, right? Like it gets the same fuzz, it's the same color. It's just, as a matter of fact, last week I had to clean out Melissa's car one day, and I removed our 2-year-old's car seat from the seat, you know, and like underneath you're like, oh, there are animals living in here. That's fun, you know, like it's wild, right? And I know that the conversation that we're gonna have this weekend probably feels really challenging. And I wanna make sure if you missed it in the email post that we made, or you missed it on the social media posts that we made, or you missed it in the pre-service post, that you know, as we've been talking about all of these different kind of weeds in our life, things that we can sort of like, that can start to crowd us out and who God's called us to be. We've talked about fear and we talked about gossip and slander. Today we're gonna talk about about sexual lust. And I know that that's a difficult conversation. And what we want to make sure of is that if you have kids, you know that this conversation is coming. We're going to be as thoughtful as we possibly can be about it. But we want you to be the hero of your kid's story. And that means you get to decide how to have this conversation with the kids in your life. And so if you're watching online with kids in the room, this service will be available on demand. You can hit pause and come back to it later. If you're in the room with kids and you're like, oh no, I didn't know this is what we were talking about, I won't judge you if you get up and leave. I promise you can go and then watch this later. I do want to clarify though, I'm not saying if you want to have this conversation with your kids, like stay or don't stay. I'm really saying how. See, our kids are getting discipled in the version of sexuality from the world around us, and we get to decide whether or not we are going to share the message and hope of Jesus as it relates to our sexuality. I believe he has something to say about it. And so this isn't if you want to talk to your kids, this is how, but we want to make sure that you know that's your decision and what we're talking about today. But the thing about where we personally escape to is that we tend to become more and more like the place we have escaped to. And in the area of sexual lust, it can sometimes look pretty distorted pretty quickly. And here's what I want to spend just a minute doing, because I think a lot of times the version of this that we see comes down to the version that we think of when we think about the idea of sex. And I think there are 3 pictures of this. We've talked about it in the past. If you missed any of that, you can go find more resources, even resources about how to talk to your kids at ehills.org/weekend. You'll see links of resources there. But there are 3 categories I want to look at. The first one is this: sex as God. Sex as God. This is really the definition from our culture. So if you look around at the culture that we all live in and the culture that's been kind of constantly changing over the course of the last 60 years or so, in the 1960s, we watched the sexual revolution tear through America. In the 1970s, we watched no-fault divorce become normal. As a result, in the 1980s, we watched the devaluing and disillusionment of what the kind of nuclear family in America looked like. And in the 90s and 2000s, we watched hookup culture and cohabitation become normative. And here we are in 2021, and what we're seeing is that sexuality and gender have become your core identity. Because when sex is your God, the pressure that you have to put on it is everything. But you know, the thing is, we're already watching the cracks in the foundation of even that most current thinking. Last week, the Christian Standard newscast of 60 Minutes, that was sarcastic, not a Christian news source. 60 Minutes did a story about this idea, and as a part of their story, they talked to a group of people who had placed their entire identity in their gender. And after they had taken all of these steps to fully experience what they felt like was most true in them, they talked to a number of people that they're catching heat for, who were like, yeah, this didn't give me what I thought it would give me. Because no matter what your gender identity is, no matter what your sexual expression is, it's never designed to be your identity. Our identity is that we're created in the image of God with infinite dignity, value, and worth. And sexuality and gender is defined by God. So that's what the culture describes sex as. Sex is God. There's this other one, which is sex as gross. This was kind of the response. Church basically oftentimes, not just Eastern Hills, like church in general, big picture, kind of the pendulum swings. So as the church, Big C, was feeling that pressure over the course of those years, in the 1990s, there was this big movement within church culture called purity culture. And what it did is it kind of took all of the pressure it was feeling from a world that was reeling and said, well, sex is gross, disgusting, and ugly, and so you should save it for the person you love that you're gonna spend the rest of your life with. And you're like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. And like if you messed up, if you did something wrong, then somehow you were less than, you were a second-class citizen. And if you're about my age or around it and you grew up in church, I just wanna apologize. Because I'm guessing for you, there have been some hangups, there have been some pain points, there's been some trauma in the way that you think about and understand sex, because sex is not God and sex is not gross. It's neither one of those things. As a matter of fact, a story that gets told a lot is about a youth speaker who's talking to a group of students during this time. It epitomized purity culture. And as he was talking about the danger and damages of sexuality outside of the confines of how God describes it, he passed a rose around the room and asked people to handle it. And eventually at the end of his talk, it comes back to him and it's completely mangled, it's all messed up. And he said, this is what it looks like when you and I give our sexuality away in a way that doesn't honor God. And he asked the question, who would want this rose? And in that moment, right, everybody feels all this shame, all this pain, especially people that are in the middle of it. And the gospel answer to that question is Jesus wants that rose. Jesus loves you and he cares about you. And it doesn't matter what you're in the middle of and it doesn't matter where you're coming from. The grace of God is enough for you. And there is healing and hope and redemption no matter what your story is or has been on this topic. Sex is not God. Sex is not gross. And the third one is sex as a gift. This is the definition that we see in the Bible. Sex is a gift from God. I don't know if you realize this, but like God didn't like make Adam and Eve and then he was like busy doing something else. And then he looked back and he was like, oh my gosh, what are you guys doing? Like, it was his idea. He knew what was gonna happen. He made the parts. He said it was all very good. He said, go forward and multiply, fill the earth. This was a part of God's divine design. Sexuality is designed for you to enjoy within a context. And that context is a covenant. A covenant is not a contract that we just sign and break. A covenant is a relationship between one man and one woman with God at the center for a lifetime. That's how God defines the proper context for sex. And I know that for some of you, if you're a part of the LGBTQ community, you're either with us in the room or you're watching online, or you know and love someone who is a part of that community, what I just said can feel pretty traumatic. Here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to just give a throwaway line about how I think about that or understand that. We have done a number of different talks and made a bunch of different resources available at ehills.org/weekend that if you want to go learn more about how we think about that or how we read the scriptures about that, please go check that out. I don't want to just dismiss you or that conversation through just an easy, quick answer that I know would do more harm than good. But we have to step back and examine how we view sex if we want to understand what we believe we are running from and what we are running to. As a matter of fact, neuroscience is telling us something over the last few years that we didn't know was true. For a long time, we thought that the brain was basically inflexible, like what it was is what it was. But what we've learned through neuroscience is this thing called neuroplasticity, which basically means that the patterns that you and I create over and over and over again reshape the highways of our brain. And what we're telling our brain about sexual fulfillment or sexual desire or what you and I do, we keep retraining our brains, not even just at an individual level, we're watching it happen societally. We are rewiring our tendencies in some really destructive ways. And this conversation is not designed to make you feel shame. Instead, I hope God uses it to bring you hope in the midst of the pain you're going through. Ultimately, lust is this escape for us from true, real, and open relationships. I believe vulnerability is the core fear that heads us down the path of unrighteous pursuit of lust and sexual sin. You know, we just don't believe that anybody can really know us and love us. And so we take these cheap imitations, but what's so tragic about it is that in these cheap imitations, what we do, we go down these paths that are self-destructive, and it's a downward spiral. And the difference between who we are over here and who people see us as gets bigger and bigger, and we further convince ourselves that nobody could really want to know me. And so what does it look like for you and me to realize this? Well, I hope what we discover together is that we're being reshaped by where we've escaped. That there's a way that we can be reshaped, that God can work on our mind, on our hearts. He can bring redemption even in the midst of difficult and challenging moments towards the good. And if you're not careful, the weeds in our life of sexual desire can steer us down some pretty bad paths as well. And really what we're gonna start with is this principle that running restrains. Running restrains. We're gonna talk about the value of spiritual endurance. Before we get there, I'd love for you to answer this question wherever you're watching. In the room, you can do it on the Eastern Hills app. What is the furthest you've ever walked or run? And some of you I know are gonna put in you're like distance runners, you're gonna put in great answers, it's gonna be amazing. Others of you at home are like getting a tape measure to see how long it is from the couch to the fridge. It's fine, like it's not a big deal, just put it in the chat. See, we're living in a cultural moment where lust has been so ingrained in our culture that we are seen as repressive for holding any idea or value that restrains our innate urges or impulses. That's the culture we live in. But here's the thing, even our world is confused about this. Even the culture around us has started to put up barriers, because a few years ago, we realized that when you tell people who are broken and sinful and have really deep wounds in them to do whatever they want, well, then the Me Too movement emerges. And we realized just how far people were out of bounds. And then when you let anybody do whatever they want, all of a sudden the names that meant something or nothing to you years ago, now when I say names like Bill Cosby or Kevin Spacey or Jeffrey Epstein, you go, oh yeah. All those people went way beyond the bounds of what was okay, even in the cultural standards of the day. And the reason that the world is so confused about this is because the world was never designed to set its own standards. The world was never designed to be the lawgiver. God was designed to be the lawgiver. That's who he is. He designed you and me to follow his pattern, not for us to set our own. And we're experiencing the pain of that. See, with most behaviors that the Bible identifies as harmful to us and dishonoring to God, we're told to fight or battle them. But sexual sin is different. Paul, writing to a church in Corinth in the first century, he's an apostle and church planter. He's talking to them about some of the distortions that they have, even around sex, in the way that they worship. And he says this, he says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. See, when we read verses like that, it just kind of reminds us of how dangerous this all is. I don't know about you, but when we think about the weeds in our yard, it's easy to wait a week or easy to wait a month. And what seemed like it was pretty under control before is now not under control anymore. And there's a type of weed that's different. It's a strangler weed where it will actually not always even able to be seen on the surface, but what it's doing is it's growing thicker and stronger, and it's strangling the root systems of trees and plants that you desperately want to keep alive. See, of the other types of sin and the other types of weeds in our life, we're told to battle them, we're told to fight them, but what we see for sexual sin is that we're told to run from sexual immorality because of its unique nature as spiritual, sexual, and physical self-harm. Paul tells a protege of his, a young pastor named Timothy, he says, so flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. We gotta run. Paul tells Timothy to run from desires that clearly center around lust. Instead, he challenges him, and I believe God challenges us to pursue faith, love, and peace in community of others. Because we're not designed to do this alone. It's impossible to do this alone. And because oftentimes the sinful temptation and sexual sin of our life is pushing back against the idea of openness and vulnerability with others, we run to solve this problem in greater and greater isolation. But every time you take a step into greater isolation, you give this sin in your life more power and more control. There's one last thing that I want to highlight about how we run from sexual immorality. It's important to see the way that God has given us grace even in the midst of our temptation. Paul says to that same church in Corinth, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. And God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. See, if you're a follower of Jesus, God is with you in every single moment of your life. He is uniquely present with you in every temptation that you face. And not only that, Paul promises to you and me that there's always, always, always a way of escape. A God-honoring, perfectly timed path to hope and healing away from the temptation and sin that's in front of us. We just have to see it and take it. A couple minutes ago, I asked you the question, what is the farthest you've ever walked or run? Well, for me, this was actually just a couple weeks ago. I was running with a buddy of mine named Justin, and I was responsible for the path that we were gonna take, and I knew like the first half of the path pretty well, and we were gonna run like 5 miles, and then we ran 11 miles without water or anything. And if you don't know this is just a quick math lesson for you. 11, more than 5. This is a bigger number. And in that context, right, mine, like, it might sound kind of impressive until you realize that it happened because I got lost, right? And the benefit that we had was that even though we didn't know where we were going, we had conditioned enough to get there, like no matter how much longer it was gonna be. And I know what you're thinking right now. Yeah, I'm conditioned, okay? And 2, hurtful. So just something for you to think about later. Sometimes in our routines though, what we do spiritually is that we assume the same escape for everything, every time. And when that person doesn't pick up the phone or the option to get out of that place or to get to that place or to punch out of work early isn't available, we don't have the spiritual stamina to keep running. And for a lot of us, when that first path that you normally take to escape sexual temptation, when that first path isn't available, you take the wrong path and you know it. And you start rewiring your brain back to the kinds of things that are quick fixes, but leave you damaged for the long term. You know, I know how easy it is in this moment, in our day and in our culture, to justify and rationalize and say, I'm not hurting anyone. But here's the truth, you're hurting everyone. Because we're being reshaped by where we've escaped. Our brains are actually being rewired in real time based on the patterns and behaviors we have set. But it doesn't have to be that way. The same thing that does that to your brain can do something else. So we're gonna talk about not only how running restrains, but how boundaries resist. And I know that this is different from anything we are regularly told in our lives. But there are aspects, whether you believe this or not, whether culture says this or not, there are aspects of who you are and how you are that should be resisted and not embraced. And sexual sin requires boundaries in your life. See, Jesus was talking to a culture that had made divorce very easy, especially for men. And he wanted to revisit the core teaching of the Hebrew scriptures and underscore what they meant. And so here we see it in Matthew 5. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, better to cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. In Matthew's biography of Jesus' life and ministry, he spends a lot of time on what we call the Sermon on the Mount. We think this is probably some of the most important and frequently revisited teaching of Jesus during his public ministry. Here, Jesus begins with the same framework that most rabbis or teachers in the first century used. He said, you have heard that it was said, and he mentions something they've heard, but I say to you, and he gives this further, more complete, specific understanding. And in this time, he kind of packs it with a pretty huge punch. And really, rabbis of the day knew that their audiences were primarily Jewish. And because of that, they had the bulk of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew scriptures, your Old Testament, memorized. And so they didn't quote entire sections, they would quote small phrases because they knew that when they did that, the person that was hearing them was remembering, was bringing to their mind the full context, right? And so for here, Jesus is affirming biblical marriage and the pattern that was and still is, the abuses around divorce, and he gets even more into that later. You can find out more information on our resource page if you're interested in that. But instead of just thinking about adultery, right, sexual intimacy outside of marriage, it was looking at a woman with lust in your heart. And that standard in our day feels impossible, doesn't it? Like the way that our brains just constantly get rewired, what seems so available all the time. But it's critical that we understand that we aren't simply talking about a look that recognizes the beauty of another image bearer. That is natural and good. Even if it brings temptation, right? Like there are some of you that for you to even just like recognize beauty in someone else, you think you've gone too far. I just think if you can't do that, we're probably wearing blindfolds. Like it's a part of life. You're gonna be able to see somebody walking across the street and go, wow, that person is beautiful. That's not what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus has in mind here is a lingering look, a second glance, with the intent of doing something with that person in our mind and in our heart that we know would be unacceptable outside our mind. That's what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus offers like a pretty quick solution, right? He says, if you want to solve for this, no problem, just gouge out your eye and cut off your hand. As a matter of fact, later on in the service, we're gonna take communion together. We're gonna get a chance to kind of reset our hearts, and applying this passage, we're gonna have limb removal stations all around the room, just whatever you need. At home, we'll send you some kits. Obviously, Jesus is using hyperbole here. He does this all throughout the Sermon on the Mount. He speaks with exaggeration. As a matter of fact, if he were advocating removing a limb to deal with sexual sin in your life, don't you think he would have gone with a more obvious one, you know? That's been funny all weekend because like 30 seconds from now, somebody's like, oh my gosh, I got it. So Jesus' point is that we need to be aggressive, even drastic in the eyes of the world in order to avoid sexual sin in our lives. We know this. We know this is true. We know this is true in our own lives, but here's what we've convinced ourselves. We've convinced ourselves it doesn't hurt anybody. We've convinced ourselves it's natural and normal. We've convinced ourselves it's no big deal, but I'm telling you, that's not true. We're hurting ourselves. We're rewiring our brains. We're creating legacies in our families. We're creating distance between us and other people in our lives. We're dehumanizing people. It matters. How we think about and handle sexual temptation and lust is incredibly important. And the measure that each of us have to take is probably different. We've talked before about these categories, right? Of the things that I should receive that are good, healthy, and helpful for me. The things that I should reject that are not worth the time and investment for what it does to me. And the idea and the category of what should be redeemed, where I can take the good and leave the bad. Here's what my concern is. My concern is that oftentimes we think we can handle way more than we really can. And we're often preheating the oven of sexual desire, even at a neurological level, with what we watch, listen to, read, scroll past, go into Instagram hashtag chases with, gaze at, long before we feel like we're in the middle of a temptation. And we've lost that temptation because of what we've been doing to rewire our brain for hours, days, weeks, months, years. And so here's something though, like, before you let yourself off the hook, before you're like, yeah, there's some guys in here that need to hear this. Before you let yourself off the hook, don't just think about this in the category of like porn. What about soft porn? Here's what I mean. Anything that's pushing us to the act of wanting intimacy that is reserved for marriage outside of it. So that's not just pornography that you go watch. That could be any number of very societally acceptable things. Only you and God know what those things are. But don't be so quick to excuse yourself from this. Books, movies, shows that are very normal in the world around us may be undermining the better life God wants for you to have in Him and with your sexual desires. I mean, it does not take very many decades to look backwards to see where we are because of streaming services and where things are in even broadcast television, to look at things today that are normal that would have been considered pornography not very long ago. And so if you are expecting the world to serve you up things that are healthy and helpful for you, you have misunderstood the role of the world in your life. It is not trying to help you. It's trying to destroy you. So here's 3 questions I want to challenge you to think about as you face sexual temptation in your life. Number 1, what do you need to start or stop consuming? For some of you, this is the most spiritual content you will consume all week. But you can read your Bible every day. You can spend time with God every day. You can be consistent in gatherings like this in person or online. You can get in community with people that help you break down and think about and talk about this stuff. And there are some things that you should stop consuming. There are some things that you should change your consumption level of. For some of us, as it relates to being sexually frustrated, here's what's happening. It's like we're shopping with no money. You're window shopping with every one of these pieces of content you put in front of you. And have you ever window shopped without money and you have like a huge desire for what you're looking at? Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna leave frustrated or you're gonna take something that isn't yours. That's what sexual temptation does too. And so you decide. What do you need to start or stop consuming? Second, what freedoms do you need to limit? For some of you, you're like, Phil, I'm already sleeping with my girlfriend. Yeah, I'm telling you to stop. The most God-honoring thing you might have to do today is break up. But it could be, what are the restrictions we need to put on our relationship? And I'm not telling you, here's what those restrictions are. I'm saying you should talk to God about what those are and put them in place. This is not legalistic. This is drastically handling sexual sin in your life. Because you're hurting yourself. You're hurting everyone that you interact with. You're rewiring your brain. When we think about the industry of pornography and what it's doing to our lives and going, well, how many big steps do you really expect me to take with technology? Some pretty big steps. You know who the number 1 category of consumers of pornography is? 12 to 17-year-old boys. Toxic sexual content has never been more affordable. It's free. It's never been more anonymous. It's never been more available, and it's never been more acceptable. If you don't have a plan to defeat sexual temptation, you will be defeated. And if you don't have a plan to defeat sexual temptation in your family, it will be defeated. We'll talk about more of that in just a minute. And then third, who do you need to be more vulnerable with? This isn't even just like about sexual desire. This is just like being more honest and open, because real love and intimacy requires accessibility and vulnerability. And I hope that if you were willing to step into a closer relationship or a closer friendship with someone and really be honest, you may discover that their greatest fear that's been sending you towards sexual sin is actually an unfounded fear. And God may use it to free you of some of the bondage you're in the middle of right now. And then lastly, we're gonna look at the idea that truth transforms. Truth transforms. A couple months ago, we did a series called Screen Time that you can find on our website at ehills.org. And I would really encourage you to check it out, especially if you're wondering, how do I solve for some of this technology stuff? We got really, really practical. I'd highly encourage you to go check that out. And we started with this passage from Romans chapter 12. Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is perfect and acceptable and good. See, with everything you've been given and the grace that God has made available to us, there is a transformation that comes when we encounter truth. We need total transformation. The world is rewiring our brain, and God wants to rewire it back the way that he always designed it to be. When I was a kid in grade school, there was a path to my bus stop that was through a couple backyards, mine and a couple others, and the couple others I probably shouldn't have been cutting through. And at first it really didn't matter, you couldn't tell, but after a while, especially in the snow, you could see this path that you were wearing down in all of these different lawns that sort of gave me away. It was obvious what I was doing. And I think that whether we want to admit it or not, what sexual sin does in our life is it rewires our brain to take a shortcut around sexuality, but that shortcut is not as fulfilling, it's not as life-giving, it's not helpful, it's actually hurtful. We have convinced ourselves as a culture that sexuality is something wildly different than what God describes it as. If you think about it like a meal, God places sexual intimacy at the place of a dessert. And he says there's an appetizer and there's a main course and there's the commitment that comes with that that's bigger than my feelings, and that God is in the middle of it, that it's designed for a lifetime. And then I experience sexual intimacy with someone that I'm willing to spend the rest of my life with. And there is something so good and deep and loving about that. The picture that our culture paints, sexuality is the appetizer. No one knows who you are. You met on an app. They DM'd you. Somebody you met, this is just a fling. It's just physiology, but it's not. And it's hurting you, and it's undermining your ability to have the kind of relationship that I bet you want later on in life. See, if faith for you is about mild behavior management, there simply is no hope for you in this area. It takes a complete dependence on God and an openness with others that lust will kill in us if we let it. Paul's writing to a church at Colossae. He says it this way. He says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you: sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. And then he writes a letter to the church at Thessalonica who deals with a ton of these issues, and he says it this way: for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. A popular question that Christians will sometimes ask is, what's God's will for my life? What's God's will for my life? And there are really good specific ways we should pursue that and seek to hear God on that. But then there are also some universal answers that God gives us for what his will for our life is. And one of those is right here from Paul, right? That we would flee from sexual immorality. As a matter of fact, Paul gives us kind of both these strategies that we've looked at today. Strategy number one, as it relates to sexual temptation in your life: abstain. from the content, the conditions, the circumstances that are going to bring that temptation to you. Strategy number 2, run. Run as far as you can, as fast as you can to God. That's what we're supposed to do. Don't tinker with it. Don't try to fight it on your own. Don't be careful about it. Avoid and then run. Look, self-control isn't popular. It's never been popular. But it leads to this life-giving kind of better we always talk about. When we say Jesus makes life better, we don't mean easier. We mean the way that he actually built you to live. It's so easy for us to see this in other people, but we put up these blinders in our own lives where we excuse ourselves from these kinds of pictures in God of what it means to follow and walk with him in this area of our life. As a matter of fact, there's a pastor in New York City named Tim Keller where he contrasts this idea. He talks about consumer sexuality and covenant sexuality. And one area of how we're being reshaped by where we've escaped is in our view of marriage and sexuality. We have become sexual consumers. It's about what we want to make ourselves feel better, and that's what lust does. That's all lust does. In consumer sexuality, we have watched marriages plummet, even just the number of people getting married, because even in the distorted and disposable version that we have today, it's still too serious for most. And when they do get married, more and more are getting divorced. Instead, we've embraced a hookup culture and living together, cohabitating in hopes that we will discover who we are compatible with, even though we know that it decreases the longevity of marriage and it hurts the relationship long term. This isn't like, let me tell you the Bible study that's telling you this. Of course, the Bible's been telling us this forever, but we're looking at secular sociologists and psychologists who are basically saying this. They're saying, hey, it seems like it helps in the short term, but in the long term, it does damage to your relationship. I'm not sure I can come up with a better definition of sin than that. It promises short-term pleasure and it delivers long-term pain. When God says do, he means he designed you that way. When he says don't, he means don't hurt yourself. As a matter of fact, you know who experiences statistically the greatest fulfillment in sex? Committed, married couples. Look, everything you're reading in a culture that says, go pursue this hookup thing, do whatever you want with whoever you want, it's great, it's the best way, it's lying to you. And maybe for you, you're like, yeah, but I just need to learn it on my own. How long do you need to learn it on your own? How long do you need to bang your head against the wall before you take my word for it that it's gonna hurt you? Before you take God's word for it that it's gonna hurt you? I hope today is the day. Because when sexuality is understood within the context of covenant, an unshakable relationship with God in the middle, it's an expression of love. When we are sexually intimate with one another, it's like a vow renewal. We peel the layer of the onion off and we get to know one another better and better. We are more fulfilled over time. We become one another's standard of beauty. That's what God wanted. It's an incredible strategy. But in the context of consumer lust sexuality, then our sex is just a marketing tool. We can't be honest because we must perform in hopes that someday the other person might want to know the real us. But the tragedy of this is we're never showing them the real us because we're just trying to convince them over and over and over again by wearing this mask that we're worthy of it. Here's the really sad part. This is what God has prepared for you in sexuality in your life, that if one day you get married, there's a filet mignon waiting, perfectly prepared for you. And God is saying, it's worth the wait. It's worth the wait. You're not ready for it. It's worth the wait. Just be patient. But what we've done, and for some of us, we started at a very, very young age, is we know that filet mignon is coming, but we're like, but dog food is right here, right now. And here's the tragedy of what happens in your brain. You think when I get into a really good relationship, when I get married, when I'm with a committed partner, everything will be fine. But when you get with a married couple or you become married and you're this committed couple and everything's the way it's supposed to be, you have trained your brain to eat dog food. You will never want real intimacy. Not until you do the work of letting God rewire your brain. That's why this is such an important conversation, because the escape routes you're taking are not neutral. We're being reshaped by where we've escaped. Why is Jesus so passionate about this? Why is he so passionate about avoiding lust and seeing marriage as the context to experience the gift of sex in our lives? Well, the answer is because lust is the exact opposite of the call that God's placed on our lives. When Jesus was backed into a corner, what's the greatest commandment? What did he say? Love God, love people. That's what Jesus said. It all sums it up. Everything else hangs off of that. And Jesus knew that lust and love can't coexist. And when we forget that, we forget how to love God and the image bearers all around us. So for you this week, what new escape patterns do you need? When you face sexual temptation, is it that book that you know is taking you down bad paths? Is it that website? Is it that habit? What is it in your head, in your heart, and in your life patterns that need to change? Because here's what I'll tell you. If you go, well, Phil, this has been really helpful. I'm gonna try a lot harder this week. You will fail. Learning more and trying harder is not a strategy that will help you. There's a passage of scripture that many of us have heard used in weddings, and when we're not careful, what we do with it at weddings is we make it be this thing that we're universally and unconditionally committing to one another, like we can do it on our own, and we can't. But it is a perfect expression of God's love for you and me. It comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where Paul says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. The reason that Jesus so clearly emphasizes and epitomizes this kind of love is because the opposite is so easy to slip into. Let's look at what happens if we flip what lust would be in that context. Lust is impatient. Lust is cruel. It only has envy. It only boasts. It is always proud. It must dishonor others. It always puts itself first. It has a quick temper. It keeps every wrong recorded. Lust delights in evil and rejects the truth. It always throws you under the bus, is always suspicious, always despairs, and never lasts. When the world says, I love you, in a movie or in a show or a book that you're reading, most of the time what it's really saying is, I lust you. That's the ceiling it has to offer. And that picture of romantic love, it'll last anywhere from 2 months to 2 years, and it will always leave you worse than it found you. If you're like, no, you don't know, Phil. Me and my girlfriend, we're really committed. I'm just telling you, if you go wrong in this area, it is going to fall apart. Now, for some of you, some of the questions we've talked about have been helpful, and you've got some handles, some things to think about and do differently this week. You got somebody you want to talk to. For others of you, this gap between who you really are that nobody knows about and who you show yourself to be has gotten really wide, and you're just not sure how to take a step. And so I'd encourage you, we have a confidential group environment called Celebrate Recovery that meets on Thursday nights at 6:30 p.m. And I would highly encourage you to come. It's a group of people who have been dealing with pain and hurt and addiction and loss, who are experiencing hope and freedom, and maybe can introduce you to the idea that it can be for you too. Jesus said, all you who are burdened, all you who are heavy laden, come to me and I'll give you rest. You're not meant to do this alone. In just a minute, we're gonna take communion together. If you're here with us in the room, they were available in the back, so you can grab it. If you didn't, you can walk back there now and grab one. If you're at home, you can grab some bread or juice, whatever you need to take it. If you've never done this before, it's an act of remembrance in which we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus for us. It's something reserved for those who call themselves followers of Jesus. And it gives us a chance to take inventory of our own hearts. And today, maybe today, it could serve as a reminder of God's new and better way of life in regards to your sexuality reflected in these teachings from the early church. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he was hanging with his friends and they were sharing a meal that they'd shared many times before, that his disciples, for the most part, had had their entire lives. And he takes the bread and he breaks it. And he said, this bread, this is my body. It's broken for you. Whenever you eat it, never forget. Likewise, after dinner, Jesus took the cup and he said, this cup represents the new covenant in my blood, a new agreement between God and mankind. That instead of you trying to get to God on your own, through your behavior, through your performance, through your ability to follow the law, it was about my ability to get to you, to do it for you. That by grace through faith, we could know God now and forever. Whenever you drink it, never forget. God, I lift up each and every person in this room, everyone that's watching online. These are the kinds of talks, God, that can feel really challenging in the moment, and then muscle memory and neural pathways take us back to habits that are hurting us, that are hurting future relationships, that are destroying things inside of us, whether we realize it or not. God, would you use today to begin a new chapter to many people's stories, where they would take steps to get help, where they would take steps to get honest, where they would take steps to even increase some boundaries in their own life, to develop spiritual stamina. That God, we could understand and experience the better way that you've offered for us to live. As we sing these words and remember the story of your forgiveness for us, help it to stick with us, God, that this week we might live different because of you. It's in Jesus' name, amen. If you're in the room with us, would you stand and sing?
Sing about the promise we have through Jesus. I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior. Oh
After a challenging message and an opportunity to take communion together, be reminded of a love that God the Father has for each and every one of us. What an amazing way to end our time, to praise the name of the Lord. Thank you so much for being here with us this weekend. 2 reminders as you leave. If you make a right, we have a prayer room. If you need to talk and debrief some of what you heard today with someone, there will be someone back there to talk with you. And then if you'd like help setting up a recurring gift, you can see Anthony in the guest house as well. Hope you have a great week this week. We can't wait to see you back here next week.